Hello.
Our story begins interlocked in a fight on Utapau. Obi-Wan and General Grievous fought with each other on a pod. They were struggling for control over the device, and the two generals of the war effort knew this fight would be the defining moment for the two of them. As they reached the end of the road, Obi-Wan and Grievous fought for control of the pod and veered off towards the side, launching Obi-Wan into Grievous's personal shuttle and knocking him out immediately. Grievous inversely was thrown off the cliff, and luckily for him, he was able to use his claws to grab a hold of the ledge before plummeting to his death. He hung for a moment, his second claw driving itself into the ground as he looked up above his head. The world was upside down, and he was almost gone. Grievous took a deep breath before using his hands and claws to climb up around the top of the little outshoot. The droid general gained a footing, and he looked over to his personal ship. He was on the run, and his fight with the Republic was becoming more and more dire. As he moved to the ship, he wondered where Kenobi went. He didn't remember seeing the Jedi fall to his death. Grievous walked around the edge of the ship and saw Kenobi, completely knocked out. He would like nothing more than to kill Obi-Wan right now, but he wouldn't. He placed his metallic hands close to Obi-Wan's neck, preparing to kill him with a snap of a wrist. Grievous was a warrior though. Kenobi was his greatest adversary, and while he would like to have Kenobi's head on a platter, it would be improper to do that when his opponent couldn't even fight back. If Grievous believed he was a superior duelist and warrior, which he did, then he would wait and make sure he won the fight properly with Kenobi. Instead of waiting for Obi-Wan to wake up, he lugged him across the edge and watched him land face first into the solid ground, before climbing into his vessel and blasting off into space. He'd be going to the Mustafar system in the Outer Rim. The Separatist leaders would be safe there, and Grievous was curious as to what Sidious wanted with them. There had to be something they could do to pull this war back into their hands. The droid general abandoned the lost cause on Utapau, hoping that remnant Separatist fleets could be regathered over Mustafar. General Grievous avoided the Republic fighters and jumped into hyperspace. When he actually arrived at Mustafar, he found a system that was plain and empty. There was no protection here. Something felt off to him. He sped his ship down to the surface of the planet and landed at the mining facilities on the surface. The droid general stormed out of his ship and marched into the facility's communications room. When he entered, he found the Separatist Council cowering. He asked them what they were doing or why they were waiting for Sidious here. Newt Gunray spoke up, telling Grievous that they were still waiting for orders from Sidious. Grievous didn't like this character. He never felt that close to Sidious, and he always seemed like someone with too much influence for never actually being in the room. Dooku's loyalty seemed faulty a lot of times, and despite Grievous's underlying distaste for Asajj, the fact that Sidious forced Dooku to turn on her felt odd. Not that he felt bad for Ventress, but his consistent questioning of loyalty showed signs of an unconfident leader, someone who couldn't trust their allies to be allies. Speaking of trust, Grievous didn't trust these leaders, because more than anything they felt like cogs in the system. They had no place here, they weren't warriors. Separatist resources were wasted on breaking them out of prison a number of times. Why were they here? Grievous didn't do anything, but he walked over to the control panel and looked at what they were looking at. For several minutes they continued to watch the progress of battles across the galaxy. Felucia, Megiddo, Kashyyyk, and Vaz Pitti were the main focuses. Grievous then noticed something. There were a bundle of statistics that he hadn't ever seen before. Despite being the general of the droid army, he never noticed the statistics of anything other than his fleet and his army, and what Grievous looked at shocked him. He asked Gunray what this was, and he smiled with a little prissy attitude, telling Grievous that this was their reinforcements. They were waiting for Sidious's command before accessing it. Without missing a beat, Grievous grabbed Gunray by the neck and lifted him off the ground. He told the foolish Trade Federation cog that there was no victory in Sidious's plan. He was setting them all up to fail, and Grievous now firmly believed that Sidious had Republic interests in his hands. Why would they withhold that amount of Separatist battle droids and warships when they were losing this half of the war? These resources weren't just war defining, they were galaxy defining. Grievous twisted his wrist and Gunray dropped to the ground. There were a couple sentry droids in the room, and they looked at Grievous before he told them to execute the counselors. They'd be going to these reserve fleets and collecting their resources. The B-1s didn't immediately react, but it was General Grievous, and he made them do as he said. Within minutes, every single member of the Separatist Council was shot in the room, and Grievous then took one of the droids' blasters and began ripping apart the consoles. His logic was if Sidious knew about Mustafar, then he could get to it, and if he could get to it, then he could find out all the data on the droids and even control them. For example, he could use a shutdown command. Obviously, Grievous got all the data on the other fleets and reserve forces before he did this. He knew where he was going. The few B1s who followed his orders were left to rot on Mustafar. Grievous was completely unaware of everything that would unfold around the galaxy as he was doing this. Even without Grievous's confirmed death, Order 66 would be executed, Jedi would die, and the Republic would crumble. Anakin would be sent to Mustafar after being turned to the dark side, and he would report that the Council had been killed. Sidious wasn't too concerned with Grievous getting on the loose, because Lord Vader could deal with that until he couldn't. Despite Grievous surviving, Anakin would still be defeated by Obi-Wan on Mustafar. The Dark Lord of the Sith obviously would be distraught by this. Vader was defeated, and Grievous was out in the galaxy. But at the same time, even after all of his triumph, he couldn't let his paranoia subside. He needed Grievous dead, and so fleets were dispatched to deal with the Separatist reserve fleets. But because the droids couldn't be shot down in time, when Republic fleets arrived to the proper coordinates, there was nothing there. It seemed like bad intel, which was forgivable by the clones. However, Sidious did find a way to take advantage of the disappearance of Grievous. Due to the Separatists surrendering and the occupation of the CIS worlds, the Empire could bulk up its military because Grievous wasn't captured and or destroyed. It'd be the perfect way to force the Senate into a commitment similar to the one they were in with the Kaminoans. Grievous, while all this was happening, was searching for allies, but found none. He couldn't complain though. The reserve CIS military was larger than the standing Republic military. It was part of the reason he was so surprised with it, but he needed to play this right. Yes, he wanted victory, and yes, he wanted Palpatine to die, but it had to be done his way. What Grievous started with was small skirmishes. He gave the people of former CIS worlds a chance to see him as a leader, or a hopeful resurgence of their movement. This worked especially well because the Empire was cracking down on their systems. People needed chain codes just to travel, for example. The free system they spent a lifetime living under was turned into an autocratic creature that required clone troopers and martial law. They may have celebrated the victory of their war, but at what cost? The Empire was more aggressive than the Republic could have ever dreamed to be. So when Grievous started liberating worlds with commando units and Magna Guards, the CIS didn't sound so bad. These were not large victories. Grievous needed the Empire to become a little comfortable, but he couldn't sacrifice too much time to the Empire. If he gave them, say, a year, the military could double in size, and that wouldn't be a sustainable conflict for Grievous, especially being that when the CIS collapsed, the Republic struck every foundry planet the Separatists had, even secret locations. To Grievous, this only proved his earlier suspicions that Sidious didn't truly support their cause. Also, Palpatine was now wearing a hood that looked just like Sidious. Grievous's engagements were very small scale, and they slowly ramped up. Commando squads could only destroy so many checkpoints, but as a week slowly went by, he started to see changes within the Republic. Their troopers lost their colors. The military went from a vibrant array of reds, blues, yellows, and purples to blandness. There was no color, only one united structure. To Grievous, this meant that the clones themselves had changed. He read every report from the commando missions he sent out. The clones weren't so lively. They didn't loosely wander around. They were stiffened soldiers, ones that acted similar to battle droids, which meant that despite all their training, they were as easy to deal with as B1 variant battle droids. Also, thanks to these commando raids, Grievous was able to get his hands on another lightsaber. He didn't think he would need it because the Jedi were all dead, but he had grown so accustomed to using the lightsaber that he preferred to wield one. Grievous maintained his fleet positions a little outside the Outer Rim. It was the largest collection of a droid naval force since Coruscant, and it would be the combined force that could push the clones and the Empire into oblivion. The droid general monitored everything the Empire did differently than the Republic, and once he had all the information he believed was valuable, he struck at Geonosis. The Empire set up a fleet of a dozen or so Venators, and they were blindsided and shredded. It wasn't even a fair fight, and Grievous didn't want it to be. He then gave the Geonosians an ultimatum, telling them that if they did not support his cause, then he would do something the Republic wasn't brave enough to do. This was a threat of extermination. He needed more battle droids, and if they weren't willing to provide them, then there'd be no point of keeping them around. They obliged, due to them believing the Republic was responsible for the death of Poggle the Lesser. Grievous obviously didn't wait around either. The fleet bounced off Geonosis to a couple systems away, at Kamino, where he blindsided the Republic once again. The Republic fleet was trying to get everything moving into different locations. A lot of Kaminoan tech was being removed from the system, but there weren't any official changes. For instance, Lamasu was still in control, and Nala Se was still on planet, but when these rebels arrived, The fleet over the planet was decimated, and the hyena bombers that broke through the space combat leveled Tapoka City, killing thousands of Kaminoans and clones on the inside. The victory over Kamino was the most jarring thing that could have ever happened to the post-Order 66 clones. They all learned the truth, and Palpatine openly declared war on the Separatist loyal worlds, basically suggesting to choke them out until Grievous gave himself over. But the issue is, Grievous didn't care, and Palpatine knew that. He knew that he could turn Separatist loyal worlds against Grievous by forcing the Imperial hand against them. What he didn't anticipate is how long Grievous would play this game of cat and mouse. The Empire did continue to add to their reserves, and their troop numbers did increase, especially with the Imperial Army and the TK Trooper programs. But these unlucky men and women wouldn't ever know what hit them. They'd be sent out to the front lines, and they'd face the wrath of citizens tired of 4 years of war and continuous combat. Imperial officers concocted plans in order to try and combat the Separatists, but the issue is, they couldn't be tracked. Grievous didn't care about any of the CIS worlds. He never did. This war was for glory and for victory. Who cares about loyal sentients? He could control them when he won. Because of this, his fleets were never located in Allied territory. So for example, whenever he struck the Empire, they'd hunt him down to the next closest formerly loyal Separatist world. When they got there, there'd be no fleet, and then they'd begin the martial law of respective systems nearby. The clones and even many of the stormtroopers started to take issue with this. The clones definitely had the biggest gripe with the Separatist loyal worlds, but these people weren't fighting the war. They clearly stood against Grievous. The droid general honestly didn't know that anything he was doing could rally people to his side, but surprisingly it did. The clones and TK troopers didn't agree with suppressing local populations of people that didn't do anything. Emphasis on didn't do anything. He also couldn't anticipate that the destruction of Tapoka City had a huge effect on the clone army. Despite Order 66 being a strong order, the clones were changed psychologically when their home fell to the bottom of Kamino. It made them all realize that this war would never end, and even if it did, it would never benefit them, because they were just pawns in the war game. Regardless, the cat and mouse game continued across the stars as the Empire tried to find the elusive Separatist movement. Grievous badly wanted to hit Coruscant, but it was impossible to do that, especially at this distance. Because most of his fleets existed away from actual star systems, he had to refuel by taking over planets and leaving before the Empire arrived. This led Grievous to his next decision, another war. He would lead his forces on a quiet conquest of the Outer Rim. His super tactical droids continued doing what they'd been doing, the hit and runs, but his main force started at Nal Hutta and worked their way from Zygeria, Tatooine, Obadiah, and all the other major Syndicate homeworlds. The best part is, he was able to completely dismantle Crimson Dawn, resulting in Maul's death, before getting what he wanted. Grievous needed resources to fund this movement, and he was able to secure locations that were transformed into foundries or shipyards. Thanks to the Outer Rim rallying around new leadership, he was able to jumpstart different locations and shipyards quickly. Now these weren't top of the line in either perspective. The shipyards could produce frigates at the most, and the foundries could handle the basic production of B-1s. But these were meant to be expendable units. That was fine. All Grievous was doing was bulking up his military force. Due to only being surrounded by battle droids, Grievous started to get a little loony. He was speaking to himself, pacing frequently and never sleeping. He loved having control over his military, but he had nothing but himself. Grievous was a pawn turned to a king, and he had no intention of ever falling back into such a useless role. Sidious was becoming very paranoid of Grievous too. The droid general was invisible. He couldn't be tracked, and every time scouts found his location, he was gone before the Imperial fleets arrived. Truthfully, Grievous spent more time in hyperspace than anywhere else. He didn't want to be in one place because that meant the Empire could track him. Was it a little over the top? Sure. Did it cost a lot of resources? Definitely. But the Outer Rim was paying for these resources with their controlled labor, and the Empire never caught up. Especially because they were so focused on Grievous himself. They never even thought about the Outer Rim. It wasn't on their radar, and the Republic never paid any mind to the Outer Rim as it was, so why would they start now? This grudge match didn't become a testament to Grievous's brilliance until the Empire accidentally fell into a rebel trap. Grievous wasn't trying to trap the Empire, but one of the main fleets from the Corps dropped into uncharted territory due to a report made by a paid bounty hunter, and they got smacked in the face. Venators were still the ship of the line for the Empire, and they got pounced by two separate rebel fleets that were being relocated closer to the core. Due to the battle being near no system, the casualty report never saw the light of day, but over the span of 4 hours, the Empire lost 13 Venators, 15 support ships, and thousands of crewmen. The loss was Grievous' first real realization that the Empire wasn't all it was made up to be. He had been iffy about an outright attack against the Empire, but a strike like this showed him that once they crippled their morale, they could win this war. So Grievous came up with a plan. He sent commando units to find Imperial strongholds. Whether they were training facilities or not, it did not matter. He wanted to find them all. Because commando droids could dress up in TK or clone trooper armor, they were able to get around to multiple locations. These missions were nothing but recon, so they never actually started any conflicts with the Empire. When they returned to their general, they gave him the readouts of important Imperial locations, which led to these rebels taking their fleets to these places and either destroying fleets or wiping out facilities. Most of these targets were easy to hit, and the Separatists moved in, showing very little remorse. The Empire was crushed, back to back to back. Every time they lost these facilities, the Empire tried to cover it up. Sometimes it'd be an orbital bombardment on training grounds, killing thousands of fresh bodies. Sometimes it'd be a shipyard, resulting in the deaths of thousands of civilians or clones. It didn't matter, and these attacks kept mounting up, and they continued to leave an effect on the troopers hit by it. One of two things happened to the manpower of the Empire. They either were blindsided with revenge, or their morale was crushed. Watching thousands of troopers reported dead continued to send a message that they were not clones. For the troopers of the former Grand Army of the Republic, they started to truly believe that without the Jedi, they wouldn't have won the war. None of these changes to mentality had the troopers turn on Palpatine, but it left the military weakened and disfigured. Grievous knew what came next, which was conquering Coruscant. The Empire spread their forces out trying to counter all these Separatist attacks, but the way they were all done is because of the commando droids. They were each targeted in a way that had the right amount of Separatist forces present per target. Not to mention all these attacks happened within the span of 48 hours of each other, so Imperial facilities were ripped apart again, back to back to back, leaving the Empire lost and confused at how so many battles could happen in such a short period of time. Grievous then had each of these forces reroute to the back door to Coruscant. It was the same one they used during the initial siege of the planet. This time though, they waited until they were fully gathered up. Initial scouts reported that there was an Imperial fleet at the end of the tunnel, used to get to Coruscant, so they would need to attack. What was reported is the fleet was featuring the new ISD vessel. It was supposed to be their new ship of the line, but no one knew what it looked like. Grievous was confident that they could win if they pushed in. When all of his forces were gathered up, he launched the assault. The resistance was stiff, but because the Empire decided to place 3 Imperial Star Destroyers inside of the tunnel, it allowed Grievous to figure out what made them tick. Despite being heavy hitters and true ships of the line, they sacrificed all their armor and hangar space for our battleship. This meant that the CIS could overwhelm these massive vessels with fighters and crack through their casing. Grievous sacrificed quite a few frigates for this victory, but it was totally worth it in the end. The Imperial Star Destroyers were very powerful, but secretly weak. Maybe not as fragile as a Venator, but with the right counter they would crack, especially because the CIS thrived in overwhelming forces. This would be an easy win for them. When Grievous' forces exited hyperspace, he launched 14 waves of Hyena bombers towards the surface. They went under the protection of HMP gunships and tri-fighters. The tri-fighters never breached the atmosphere of the planet, but similar to their first attack, they blindsided the Empire. They did know the Seppies were coming, but the defense fleet was weakened. They had dispersed so many forces to counter Grievous that they left their capital defenseless. The bombers cut through the atmosphere and into the city of Coruscant. The main targets were the Imperial Palace and the Senate building. The bombers dispersed their waves so that they could survive any anti-fighter cover that the Empire may have had on the ground. What was surprising was the number of Venators littering the skyline. Ever since the rise of the Empire, naval vessels became a part of the city. The Hyenas brushed past these Venators by laying heavy ordnance into their bridges, before darting towards the important structures for the Empire. Some of the Venators hit would slam into skyscrapers due to being so low in orbit. The bombers didn't stop either. They continued moving until they leveled both the Imperial Palace and the Senate building. Outside the planet itself, the battle heated up. Long before the two buildings erupted into flames, General Grievous marched his fleet into the mouth of the Devil. He stood at the front of his command bridge, determined to win a battle that was in his control. While paling in comparison to the size of the previous battle here, he knew that they needed to strike quickly and effectively. Imperial reinforcements would be nightmarish to deal with. While a good majority of his bombers were still terrorizing the people on the surface, he still had a massive fleet, and it was filled with support ships and fighters. Grievous knew he would never win a straight fight with the Empire, so he made sure that his fleet was extra prepared with fighters. It had been a weakness with the Republic, and sure enough, it was the same case with the Empire. Not to mention, TK pilots were much more ineffective than actual clones, so they were getting shredded with the basic vulture droids. With a couple Lucrehawk variants filling up the skies, Grievous could charge the ISDs in the Imperial lines and allow the Venators to become sitting ducks. Grievous wasn't dumb enough to doubt the effectiveness of the Venator, but the ISDs were his main target. If they were destroyed, then this battle would be his for the taking. The droid general released his landing transports under the cover of a pincer maneuver. Grievous drove straight down the middle of the flank, where all the ISDs were. It initially looked to be a failure, but once the first bunch of them were destroyed, including Governor Tarkin's, the fleet caved. The bombers used the wreckage as cover to launch assaults on the Venators. This is where the landing troops were able to make their landing procedures. On the ground, Sidious watched the skies fill with bombers as he ordered the Inquisitors to Grievous' flagship to destroy him. This would be his last order, because shortly after this was sent out, he was killed in a bomb that ripped his office into shreds. Vader wasn't on planet at the moment, and the Inquisitors launched their assault on Grievous' flagship. They were escorted by waves of LAATs and V-Wings. Due to the precision of their counterattack, the Inquisitors were able to land inside of Grievous' flagship. He didn't move from his position, and instead deployed every countermeasure he could, ensuring the reactor of his flagship was most protected. Luckily for him, the Inquisitors were coming after him, not the reactor, and the Stormtroopers, well, they were cannon fodder. As the fleet battle continued to wage on and the Separatist forces made their way into the city, Grievous was challenged by a number of former Jedi. He didn't recognize one of them, but he would deal with them. This was the entire current Inquisitor unit. They ignited their blaze and charged Grievous. The droid general had 2 lightsabers collected by Commander Droid since Order 66. It wasn't anything like his former collection, but he had been yearning for a chance to add more lightsabers to his collection. The Inquisitors charged Grievous, and his 2 blades parried and countered everything the former Jedi threw at him. He laughed maniacally as he ripped through one after the other. Grand Inquisitor tried to keep his unit together, but they continued dropping. It was funny, honestly. Many of these former Jedi would be gutted by the droid general of the CIS, and they'd die on the floor of a Separatist cruiser, looking at the wreckage of the Jedi Temple. It was almost poetic, how, as if they could escape the clutches of the Clone War, they'd still be killed by the CIS general. Grievous marched over the dead bodies, using his claws to obtain his last kill on one of the brothers. It was a vile match, but Grievous turned to his crew and continued leading the assault. Once the first wave of the assault was finished, Grievous parked his ships inside the Coruscant skyline and dared the Empire to come in after him. And they did. It was so enjoyable to him. Didn't matter what it was. It could be an ISD, a Venator, an Arquentans, didn't matter. They were all crushed. Grievous stood on his bridge as the dead Jedi were taken from it, and he watched ship after ship slammed into the surface of Coruscant. Inside of one of these fleets was the evil Lord Vader, demanding that the Empire win. But when he realized there was no Sidious, he lost interest in fighting for the Empire. These weren't his people, these weren't his troopers, and he wanted something far more than to die in the second Clone War or whatever this was. Vader took himself away from the combat as his flagship was ripped to shreds after 3 waves of hyenas bombarded it. The reason the Imperial counter failed so badly is that unlike the original Battle of Coruscant, they didn't come in at the same time. They all entered the combat at separate times, which meant the CIS was able to shred weaker fleets instead of facing off against a combined stronger fleet. The Empire continued funneling resources into the battle because of a mass panic, and the siege of Coruscant became a massacre, one costing the lives of millions of military personnel and a billion civilians. Grievous didn't care about killing them, because they weren't a target, but he also wasn't trying to avoid killing them, so their deaths were an extra statistic. After a week of combat, the Empire would retreat from its capital. The final tally, or at least calculated tally, would be a death toll of 13 million Imperial soldiers, including clones, TK, and everything in between. The civilian casualty count increased to 1.28 billion, mostly due to an Imperial flagship getting shot out of the sky and crashing into its citizen bunkers. Also, there was a successful counter that hit a Lucrehawk, and the ship slammed into a Coruscant plaza, wiping out 5 or 6 skyscrapers. It was a terrible loss of life, but General Grievous was ready to make amends with the galaxy that had betrayed him. He wasn't going to just give them a leg up. He was going to make this galaxy and this empire his. With the Outer Rim almost in full support of his movement, he knew what to do. In order to control a population, one must control their hope. So Grievous would turn the core into the Outer Rim, and the Outer Rim into the core. He'd make all the dejected, forgotten about people in the galaxy the ruling class. He didn't care about local politics or anything of the sort. He just understood that to keep his power, he needed to give the people of the core, and even the mid-rim, something to hate. Something to hate that wasn't him, actually. Sure, he was the bringer of chaos, but if he could turn these people on their neighbors, if he could turn them on communities a system away, then he already won. This wasn't going to be automatic. The Imperial military was still large, and Grievous's military was still very fragile, but he could manage. If they continued holding their fleets inside cities and near civilians, then the Empire wouldn't attack. Many of these Imperials had families on Coruscant, and without the names of victims being released, he tortured military personnel by not letting them know if their family was killed in the conflict or not. Coruscant had trillions of residents, but 1.28 billion people were killed. No one in the Imperial military could make contact with their families, and Grievous designed it like that. He didn't want them to attack him in fear that they could hurt their families. Ironically, this mostly applied to Imperial officers, which is exactly why Grievous did this. The Grunts wouldn't have family members in the financial districts or the upper levels of Coruscant. Those would be families that could afford to send their kids to the academies across the galaxy. So in a sick way, Grievous added more incentive for Imperial troopers to turn on their officers. All Grievous needed was time, and he bought himself as much as he needed. In the weeks following the siege of Coruscant, he would send out fleets to demolish other utopias around the core. He would also take what he could from the Imperial banks and fund the Outer Rim, turning their ragged societies into paradises. It wouldn't happen overnight, but he intended on turning the Outer Rim into one giant Canto bite. Out of the places in the Outer Rim, Cantonica was the one place that people from the core went to. Now they could watch the barren lands of the oppressed rise into the golden luxury seats the core once held. And because Grievous was a warrior, he knew that the key to keeping citizens away from him and his rule was by giving them more enemies. The Imperial Navy tried to combat everything Grievous did, but with control over the banks, he could do anything he wanted. Top-of-the-line droid foundries and shipyards popped up across the Outer Rim, and this was Grievous's incentive for Outer Rim worlds to get their revenge. If they supported him, he'd make them rich. While all Grievous did was hold Coruscant, it was the key to everything. After 7 months of a stalemate, the Empire jumped in after them, but by this point it was too late. Commando units had been tasked with layering traps inside of ISDs at the Kuat drive yards for the last 7 months. They reconfigured the firing mechanisms on the heavy cannons. Grievous believed they'd attack at one point or another, and because these commando droids were wearing TK armor, they were given unlimited space to work with. This meant that when a full fleet of ISDs arrived over Coruscant, one that could completely manhandle Grievous's fleet, they combusted. The first shots rang out, and the vessels exploded from the inside out. Not every ship did, because not every ISD was made at Kuat, but most of them definitely didn't. The rest of the ships just became targets and they were wiped out. Grievous knew that to fight this empire, he needed to be patient, so he waited them out. He gave the Outer Rim resources and he quieted down any attempts at a coup against him. Because the droid foundries got started so quickly, and were filled with new units, Grievous was able to send these forces out to other core worlds for oppressive strikes at luxurious cities. These people had a chance to evacuate. Those who didn't would be burned in the fires. But of course, not all of them would be. Grievous needed individuals to resent the Outer Rim and the Mid-Rim. The Mid-Rim would receive the best and the worst of both worlds. Some would be hit like the core, others would be pampered like the Outer Rim. Grievous knew that he could overwhelm any force in the galaxy with his military by this point. All he needed was to control the people themselves. He would oversee many more victories in his time. While there would be Jedi attempts to attack him, all of them would fall short. Kenobi's main concern would be watching over Luke on Tatooine, but Owen and Beru outed him to the new Empire. Kenobi would end up dying at the hands of a couple thousand battle droids, actually. Grievous would never learn that his greatest rival perished in a blaster fight. Bail would remove Leia from Alderaan, but being that Raya was queen, he stayed. Leia would go to the Lars and be raised with her brother. Raya and Bail would be killed when the droids arrived. It was a tragic state of affairs, but Grievous, once he pressed his claws down on the throat of the galaxy, didn't release his grip. Once the Imperial military paled in comparison to his own, he made examples of individuals still serving the Empire, and to make sure everything was just a little bit better, after the first year of his Imperial rule, the Outer Rim would get cocky. Their people would shove their luxury into the faces of the oppressed core, and to make things even better, the people of the Outer Rim made a petition to their emperor. Grievous was never seen by the public, more so just an elusive figure. He was recognized as a ruler because there were flags with his mask on them. Regardless, these people wanted to make an example of the people in the core. They wanted to punish them for centuries of neglect. They wanted revenge, and Grievous couldn't be happier, so he allowed it. The pompous people of the core would be turned into slaves for the Outer Rim. It was truly horrid, but as is the changing of the guard. The society became dystopian, and Grievous watched it crumble under the might of his military strength. He didn't want to be open as the Empire, and he didn't want to be as careless as Sidious. At least Grievous wouldn't have to worry about Yoda or Vader. Yoda left exile and got caught in a fleet battle, one where he was crushed by a turbo laser. Vader would spend a lifetime trying to resurrect the dead. Instead, he accidentally caused an outbreak on Naboo, one that forced him to kill his wife once more, and then watch her world crumble to madness as a rapid flu outbreak turned the sick into cannibals. It would be dealt with, but it was something Vader would never recover from. Grievous inversely only focused on perpetuating systematic divide between the mid-rim, outer rim, and the core. It truthfully wasn't ever very difficult to do, especially because as the years went by, all he did was continue funding an ever-increasing military, one that would never be stopped. The best part is, because the outer rim, mid-rim, and core were so reliant on Grievous, they could never declare war on each other or on him. None of them had standing armies, and because all their funneled hate was going towards each other, they weren't ever looking up at their real enemies. Due to Grievous' cybernetics, he'd find a chance to revel in his dystopian empire for centuries. It would be an empire where he had very few allies, and he watched the meter continue flipping. As different ends of the galaxy vied for control, they never really had to begin with. And that, my friends, is that dark story. Special thanks to our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, INTJ Recluse, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Laliant Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewu670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Santa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calig, Yanli66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fordo's Legacy Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, Main 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button from otherwise, check out on Patreon, cool things on there. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. So, this is kind of a contrast to the Maul one. The Maul one's kind of like a bittersweet, happier ending. This one's a little bit darker, and it has to be that way. This is General Grievous. He's not gonna be like super happy. It's not like, it's definitely different from the General Grievous Joins the Rebellion one, and I wanted it to feel that way. I wanted it to feel like an unhinged Grievous, becoming more and more unhinged as the days and years go by, because he has no one around him, and he's constantly amping himself up for more control. But I definitely wanted Grievous to feel like he was completely in control of his military force and not actually being played like a puppet. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.